Welcome to the WLPGA's LPG Talks interview series. Each interview will feature LPG industry leaders and explore current opportunities, trends and developments in the LPG industry. We hope you will enjoy these informative discussions.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Michael Kelly, and you are watching LPG Talks. Today, I'm joined by Rob Bailis. He's the senior scientist from the Stockholm Environment Institute, SEI, and he is also one of the authors of Scaling Up: Gas and Electric Cooking in Low and Middle Income Countries, Climate Threat or Mitigation Strategy with Co-Benefits, which is an open source study, so it's available to everyone. And we'll put the link in the show notes of this study, which had some pretty startling findings on the benefits of switching people in developing countries to cooking on LPG. Rob, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for inviting me to speak about this. It's great to be here.
Thank you for agreeing to join us. I wanted to kick off first, before we get into the discussion of what your study says and its findings. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what Stockholm Environment Institute is, because I'm sure many of my members don't know.
Sure. So we are a global environmental think tank with a mandate to bridge science and policy. So the team consists mostly of researchers with admin and support staff. We have 9 offices spread across 5 continents. The headquarters are in Stockholm, which makes sense given the title. But we're actually named not after the city, but named after the Stockholm Environmental Conference that happened in 1972, which was one of the first time the global community came together and realized we need to do something about the environmental issues that we face as society. So yeah, we work on all sorts of different fields, including energy, climate change, climate adaptation and mitigation, water, you name it. So, I joined about 9 years ago, and I'm based in the US, but like I said, we have offices all around the world.
Well, thank you. And let's talk about the study itself. Can you tell us what are the conclusions and what your findings, and if there was anything that actually surprised you about your findings?
Sure. So let me lay a little bit of a foundation here. So we undertook this study to look at what would happen if the roughly 40% of the world's population that currently cook with what we consider polluting fuels, which would be solid biomass like wood or charcoal or crop residues, plus mineral coal, which is used in some countries, and kerosene, also used in limited numbers, but in some places. What would happen if those people using polluting fuels transition to what we would consider as clean fuels? And we use a WHO definition for that, which is based on the potential exposures from the pollution that occurs when you burn stuff. And clean fuels would include LPG or other gaseous fuels, electricity, solar, of course, and ethanol, and then biomass when burned in certain types of stoves. We don't have to get into the details there. So what would happen if you make this transition from polluting to clean with all those fuels grouped, in the respective categories? And in particular, we were interested in looking at LPG because, well, for 2 reasons. One, there's a lot of momentum there already. So if you look at the way that people have switched their cooking over the past 10 years, roughly 1 billion people between 2010 and 2020 switched over and started cooking with what we consider clean fuels. And about 3/4 of them switched to LPG. So this momentum is there. However, there are many regions that are lagging in this transition, and that even if you project forward, probably will not make it in the next, say, generation, unless there's a concerted effort from outside with funding and creating enabling environments, et cetera. But some of those funding agencies are hesitant to put money into LPG because it's a fossil fuel. And, we're looking at this whole global movement, going to net zero or at least dramatically ramping down emissions. And so there's some resistance there. So we thought, okay, well, let's look at this. Is it really, is it a climate win or is it a climate loss? Like, that's where we came up with a clever title for our paper. So we built a model basically that would try and estimate what would be the changes in emissions as people made this transition, and then what would be the climate implications of that. Okay, so that's
and what did you find? What were your findings?
So what we found is that most emissions, both climate relevant emissions, so CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, and some short-lived climate forces, which I can define in a second if you think the audience isn't familiar with that term, go down and go down fairly dramatically. CO2 by 20 to 30%, depending on your assumptions. But the others, methane, nitrous oxide, and the short-lived forcers really go down tremendously, like by 90% or more. And as a result, overall, it's a climate win, basically. You get less warming pollution emitted, and you get less warming as a result. It's a tiny bit. We projected out just a couple of decades because we didn't want to make projections beyond that. It's just you're sort of making things up if you go beyond that. But over the say next 20, 30 years, it would be a small but significant lowering in global temperature compared to business as usual, where we have these people not switching over from polluting fuels.
And this is switching to cleaner fuels, including LPG, or is this just switching to LPG?
So what we did was model looking at trajectories of how people are expected to cook with various fuels, and we took all of the polluting fuels out of the picture and subbed in LPG in trajectories where populations were expected to go to electricity, say, we kept that. But we swapped out all of the polluting fuels in the future gradually over time, each year a little bit of an increment, until I think we ended in 2040, where everyone who would have been using polluting fuels was now using LPG, and then there's still a slice of the population that's using electricity. And we factored in the emissions from the grid electricity and
Sure.
things as well.
So this is a solid climate benefit, as well as all the ancillary benefits from a health and socioeconomic point of view, correct?
Yes, with a caveat. And
Okay.
if you may. The caveat is there's a lot of uncertainty in climate modeling, particularly around those short-lived forcers that I mentioned earlier. And that's where the climate win comes, but there's also a lot of uncertainty around that. And when I say short-lived forcers, I mean pollutants like particulate matter, which from a climate perspective, we usually break down into aerosols that are either black carbon or organic carbon. And other short-lived forcers include some non-methane hydrocarbons and methane itself. So methane itself is an unambiguous win. Totally, there's not a lot of uncertainty there, and we reduce it a lot. Black carbon and organic carbon also both get reduced a lot, but, and here's the key, black carbon is a warming agent and organic carbon is a cooling agent. So we're shutting them both down simultaneously. And so we're actually taking away a little bit of the warming, but we're also taking away a little bit of the cooling. And there's just too much uncertainty around that to say, like, absolutely, we know for sure it will be a climate win in the short time period. But the central trend, when you do statistics, you have a cloud of data, and then you have a central trend. The central trend indicates cooling. So we think we're pretty sure that it would result in cooling, but we just don't have the accuracy in our models to take away all of the uncertainty. What I should also add, those same those same short-lived forcers, that's the stuff that's really bad to breathe. So it's unambiguously a win for health. Absolutely. And you really do get tremendous co-benefits if you take these polluting fuels out of the mix. And this is what the donors were concerned about, the people who might fund these transitions. It's very unlikely to be a net warmer, probably a net cooler, because, like I said, this central trend brings us to a net cooling situation. So for those who were concerned that, it's better for health, but what about climate? It's probably better for climate too. And if we were able to model a little bit further in the future, I think, we would see that a little more clearly with less uncertainty.
And if you were to give the audience that's watching today, most of whom work in the LPG industry, but not all of them, if you would want to give them 3 main bullet points to take away from your research, what would those be?
Okay, so one, well, just exactly what I said. If you're swapping out a polluting fuel like wood, or particularly charcoal has a little more of a climate impact for reasons we don't have to get into. If you're swapping that out for LPG, then it's very likely a climate win. You definitely get fewer emissions of most of the climate forcing agents, the warming agents. And the only uncertainty there is that you're lowering organic carbon, a cooling agent, but that's actually a good thing too from other perspectives, from health and air quality. So it's very likely a climate win. And if people say, well, I don't really believe you, point them to our paper, because we go through all of the data pretty clearly. It's been through peer review, and I think it stands up to scrutiny. So that was one. Two would be, we need to think about, okay, how do we deliver these services? And that's something that we don't get into in the paper, but it's something very critical. So if we say that countries should be using LPG, we need to think about, what does that mean? What are the actual implications for a given country, in a low and middle income situation, to make that commitment? What's needed? What can buffer them from price volatility and all the other things that don't get modeled in a climate model, but are still very relevant from a policy perspective. And then, how do we deal with that last mile kind of distribution, and the safety issues and all those other things, standards and things like that need to be set up for a good industry. But from an environmental perspective, absolutely, health, climate, it's pretty unambiguous.
Thank you so much. Rob Bailis, I wanted to let our readers know that if you're interested in joining us in November, LPG Week 2023, featuring the 35th World LPG Forum and the European Liquid Gas Congress, take place from the 14th to the 17th of November in Rome, the Eternal City. Rob, thank you so much for being with us. This has been fascinating. The research you're doing is crucial, and we hope to see you again in the future.
Thanks very much, Mike. It's been fun.
Thank you. You've been watching LPG Talks. I'm Michael Kelly. I hope to see you next time.